Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending. I thought by way of introduction, as Jack mentioned, looking back into the history of the harmonization process and the necessity for it, I did work for Digital Equipment Corporation. In the late 1980s, they decided to get away from an application technology. And suddenly, we had a lot of customers that were deployed on the LIMS SM platform that was hosted by Digital. We were suddenly faced with a lot of customers having to move to other vendor products. And we had to sit back and try to devise a strategy for the best way to understand the requirements and the ability to do that. What we quickly learned in the early stages of those projects were that customers would always refer to the frame of reference that they had, meaning the current application. And we started to see a lot of arguments between groups about how best to define the requirements for the next system. And we decided that the best way was to abstract ourselves from the current state environment, meaning the LIMS system that they had deployed, and move up to a business layer. And that's what we'll be talking about today in the process for executing it. So as a result of that strategy, we've refined it over the years and have used it in dozens and dozens of accounts. I personally have been involved in about 150 account projects over the years. So let's look at what the challenges are. Companies these days are trying to consolidate and simplify their testing operations. And there's been a trend, it's been kind of a gravitational pull by the customer base actually towards centrally served browser access systems, largely due to the simplicity of supporting a browser access system and getting away from the client server systems. And what was once a desire is now a requirement. What we mean by that is that in the days of client server systems, companies always believed that was probably a good thing to have a consolidation of processes. And they chose this for the reason that from a matter of support, from a matter of training, from a matter of transportability. And what I mean by that is companies that had multiple sites, if they had similar processes between sites, they could literally move people between different geographical sites and they would be able to work instantly when they were moved. From a support standpoint, not having to support 5 different systems or whatever, or even 5 different permutations of a similar system, greatly facilitated the whole support picture. And from a training aspect, you're not training people on 5 different systems or systems indigenous to specific sites. So you could train on one system, and we do realize that there are differences sometimes that are required between geographical sites. This is something we'll address in a few minutes. But overall, it was the customer base that started to put pressure on the suppliers of LIMS systems to get to a centrally served system. So back in the early days, the history of LIMS, if you look at the genesis of LIMS to begin with, in the early 1980s, Beckman Corporation came out with one of the first LIMS systems. And LIMS systems were generally devices to try to trigger instrument sales, things that they had very well measured and understood margins for. And the companies that supplied them early on, Beckman, VG, P.E. Nelson, and so forth, PerkinElmer, they figured that if they supplied the ability to acquire and process data from their instrumentation, that it would draw people to buy more instrumentation. Then over the years, we started to see